Today we are testing the AMD HD5450 in Overwatch 2. You can see the CPU we're pairing with in Task Manager. It's the Intel Pentium G7400, and the memory/RAM is 32GB of DDR4 3200MHz RAM. The graphics card is not overclocked in MSI Afterburner, but we will be doing that later. And in hardware monitor, you can see everything that is in there, as well as in CPU-Z and GPU-Z. Without further ado, let's get into the game. At 1080p on the low preset in borderless windowed mode with a 600 frame per second cap and a render scale set to automatic, I was getting roughly in the ballpark of 25 to 30 frames per second. I thought this would be native 1080p, but apparently it is not, because it is still downscaling the game to some other resolution, which is significantly lower than 1080p. Then I decided to set the minimum frame rate to 60 to see if it can target 60 frames per second. With the dynamic resolution, wait, what was that called again? With the render scale still set to automatic. And the frame rate dropped, which is quite weird because on the UHD 710 graphics, it made the frame rate go up higher. So that is something. Then I tried FSR 1.0, and by doing that, we also lost more frames per second, which is kind of weird because that should, in theory, make the game run better. But it didn't. It made it run significantly worse. Instead of getting 25 frames per second, we were getting about roughly 14. Now, I should mention, we still did have that 60 frames per second target in place. Then I worked out what the render scale set to automatic actually did. So I set it to custom and had it at native 720p borderless. And it ran very bad. It was getting amazingly 12 frames per second. Yes, 12 frames per second at 720p. Yeah, that is amazing. Then at 720p, I went over and put the render scale back to automatic, and I put a 500 frame per second target in the frame rate in to see if we could actually get any frame rate better than 12. And it did. We were getting roughly 30, so that's a slight improvement. It's getting into the playable range, but the input lag is horrendous. There's about a half a second delay between you moving your mouse or clicking and the game actually doing what you tell it to do. Then I tried FSR again, and it chopped off about 10 frames per second, so we were getting 20. Still not ideal. Then I set the resolution scale to 50% of 720p, which is 360p, and the game was running about the same as with the 60 frame per second target. We were getting between 20 and 30 frames per second. Still far from ideal. Then I tried 1024 by 768 with the 50% render scale, and we were getting about 2 frames per second more than at 720p. Then I remembered from watching a Z-Worms gaming video on Overwatch 2 with the GT710 that the low preset isn't actually the lowest settings. You can actually go over and disable a few more different settings like anti-aliasing, for example, and by doing that and disabling every single setting possible, in the graphics settings, I was getting actually a significant amount more FPS. I was getting roughly 35 to 40 at 768p, or 1024 by 768. So, again, it's far from ideal. But it is getting closer to being a somewhat decent-ish experience. Then I went over and gave my HD5450 the biggest possible overclock I can in MSI Afterburner, which is maxing out both the core clock and memory clock sliders. I don't know if all the HD5450s can do that, but at least mine can, and it can still be stable. And with those significant high overclocks, we were getting amazingly higher frame rates. I'm kidding. Okay, we were getting about 3 more frames per second, maybe 4. So, yes, it did slightly help, but still, no. Since I was still getting pretty bad input lag, I kept the frame rate to 30, and that actually did help with the input lag slightly, though at the same time we were getting worse frame rates, which didn't exactly help that much either. So it was basically about the same badness as with the input lag, because the input lag was just still there, just slightly not as there. But I still have a few more tricks up my sleeve. In full screen mode, the game resolution only lets you go down to 1024 by 768. Though, in windowed borderless mode, you can go lower. So in windowed borderless mode, it goes over and makes the game the exact same size as your desktop resolution. So I set my desktop resolution to 800 by 600. And by doing that, the game was running at 800 by 600 resolution with a 50% resolution scale, which would be 400 by 300, if I'm not mistaken. So 300p basically, and by running the game at said 300p, we were getting in the ballpark of roughly 40 to 50 frames per second, almost 60 at times, which is downright impressive for this graphics card, if you ignore the fact that it looks like absolute garbage. FSR 1.0 looks the same with it on and off. I was hoping it would sharpen the image, but it doesn't really, and the frame rate was pretty much the same with it on as is with it off. But I wasn't done yet, so in Windows where you can change the screen resolution, there is a place where it's called Advanced Display Settings down at the bottom. If you click that, then I went over and clicked on Display Adapter Properties for Display 1. And by doing that, it brings up the properties, then I go over and press List All Modes. And then from there I scroll all the way to the top, and there is an option for 640 by 480. Yes, 640 by 480 on the desktop resolution. That is tiny. The only way you can, of course, get that is by going to that option. You just have to click on it and press the OK button and apply. Though, be warned, your screen's gonna look incredibly weird and shrinked like that. But one way or another, with that resolution, we can still play the game, which is kind of bonkers. At that resolution with the render scale of 50%, the lowest settings, the overclock, and everything, it says Overwatch has crashed in the graphics driver. And that just happened once. I reopened the game, and after that, it ran fine. But wait, okay, this is completely unrelated with Overwatch, but look at MSI Afterburner. Usually on a, for example, 1440p screen, that is a very small window. You can't make it bigger. Well, on here, it's bigger than your entire screen. Yes, it is bigger than your entire screen. And then if you move the window around, parts of it is missing. I've never seen MSI Afterburner like that before. It is really, really weird. I just had to show you that. It's really weird. So at 640 by 480 resolution, with the overclock, with the 50% render scale, which makes it come out to 320 by 240 pixels, the game was running pretty much about the exact same as with the other resolution. What was that again? The other resolution? I don't even remember. There's so many resolutions we've tried. The last resolution, 300p, yes. So it ran the same as 300p, but looks significantly worse. So, is it worth going down this low? Not really, but the delay between you moving your mouse and clicking it and whatnot is pretty much gone though, so that is a plus. It is a lot more playable in that regard, but you just can't see anything you want to shoot now. So then I tried FSR on the maximum sharpening, and the frame rate was pretty much about the same, maybe slightly lower, but it did look a little bit better. It was a little bit more sharp. Don't get me wrong, both of them look like you went over and used sandpaper on your eyes, but at least it was slightly less sandpaper on the eyesy at FSR than without FSR. Then I went into the settings folder of the game. Yes, the settings folder, or technically it's a text document, where it has all of the game's settings and you can adjust them through text. And I was trying to disable stuff like shadows and anything I really could. But for some reason, in that document that I found, or file that I found, there wasn't really that much I could do at all. I tried a whole bunch of different things, typed a whole bunch of random numbers into different spots. I'm not sure what 95% of it does, and nothing really happened. I tried setting the file to read only, so hopefully the game doesn't set the stuff back to how it was stock, because it kept resetting the settings, and that also didn't help. It just didn't do anything. So I don't know if I was doing something wrong or right, or if there's even a way to change any of those settings I want to change. I really don't recommend playing Overwatch 2 on a AMD HD 5450, but if you have it, you can if you don't mind this resolution. And to be honest, if you have an HD 5450, you're kind of used to this resolution, so there's that. Also, if you'd like to see how the Intel Pentium G7400 runs this game, I recommend checking out the video on screen. Thank you so much for watching, and have a nice day.